So what we're going to be talking about today is the Smith & Wesson 6946. Now, to understand this firearm and the reason why it's so important in police gun or even concealed carry history is what we had before. So, it's 1985. Smith & Wesson came off a gun similar to this. I think it's a 6.59 or something. The only people that are really into carrying these type of guns were SWAT team, maybe some detectives here and there. The police revolver, the 38 and 357 was still the way, mainly because the manufacturers couldn't prove themselves how they were better besides capacity, and the attitude was, well, we're not really using our guns very often, and what could go wrong? Also, with other platforms like the 1911 platform at the time, with the current hollow points and other bullet technology, would have a lot of trouble loading hollow point bullets and other things. And the 1911 is a learning curve for a lot of the average police officers, even back then. So it wasn't a popular choice. So I left them with the Beretta 92, which that also became very popular in police work, especially for Connecticut State Police. I'm going to put a picture of that in there, the story behind that, which I'll talk about in the Beretta video. And other agencies that became popular with. Another semi-auto you would see SIG occasionally, but that was more of the Massachusetts State Police in the late 80s, early 90s. You would see SIG a lot. But on TV, I don't really remember seeing the SIG as much. It was always, like on episodes of Cops, it always was Beretta 92, some variant of the 3rd gen, and of course the venerable police revolver. But anyhow, the year's around 1991 or so. My grandfather is on the auxiliary police department here. Just a little generic Massachusetts police badge tie tack, which, you know, I think every police officer, if a tie requires a uniform, if your department requires a tie, which I think ties are obsolete, polish one of these up, use it as a tie clip, you know? Why not? And this was his knife. That was back in the day where cops still carried the buck knives, you know, like Poncho John did on chips. Because the folding pocket clip knives were not a popular thing until almost the early 2000s. Simple buck knife made in the USA. I don't personally carry this, but I like the wood grips on it. I really do. We have the standard 12-round magazine here. You may notice it says jams on that. I'll talk about that in a minute. This is what goes in the gun. The gun, of course, as you can see, is empty, and this is empty. This is how you carry it in regular configuration, 12 rounds. I also have some 10-round magazines for it. Yeah, well, the only thing good about 10-round magazines is that when I lived in Massachusetts, it made the gun, I could have more magazines. They made the gun a little lighter, too, but you get 12 rounds, come with the gun, 2 of these magazines, the other one's in the other room loaded. So I get 13 9mm rounds. The gun is what's called double action only. And what's interesting about this firearm, it kind of reminds me of the Glock, or a striker fire gun, where if you're DASA, you could sit here all day and pull this trigger back, but you get one trigger pull to dry fire, right? And that's it. That's it. You gotta recock the gun again. Now, normally, if there are bullets in here, the energy of the bullet will recock this firearm. It's a double action only trigger. It's not that bad. But then again, once I mentioned before, I'm used to shooting revolvers and other double action only type triggers. I'm into shooting revolvers and those single action, double action DASA triggers. So, you know, give us some younger persons in the Glocks. They're probably going to not like this. Typical 3rd gen stuff. There are not night sights on here, but they're the Novak style sights, which I've learned to love. What's funny is the milling of this. The slide milling leaves holes for the decocker. There is no decocker safety on this, by the way, which is a big selling point for this gun. Because remember, all the other semi-autos at the time with the exception of Glock, which really wasn't making its way in yet in the early 90s. It was starting to happen, but wasn't there just yet. We're talking more, by the mid-90s, Glock made huge inroads. But what's interesting is how the slide is basically a 6906 slide for safety. This doesn't do anything. There's just a spring cutout hole in here. It's interesting, that's all. This gun was carried on duty with my grandfather as an auxiliary police officer from 1991 to 2003. It also was his everyday carry off-duty gun. And usually he carried it in this configuration. But with technology, even in the 90s, before the internet, there's always a way. This is a S&W 5906 15-round magazine, and it's pre-ban, of course, for your Massachusetts people. It has a shamrock on the side of it. I think it has to do with the Boston Police Association or something. I don't know. My grandfather's not Irish at all. This grandfather isn't. And back in the day, even with the revolvers back in the day, it was common for police officers to kind of dress up their grips, either with a seal of their department, their name on the back of the grips, maybe something like this. It just was a common thing. Something you don't really see much anymore if it's striker-fired guns, except for some may change the backplate to something they like. Maybe their police department name, their badge number, or something. But this has an extender on it, like a spacer on it. And they still make these. They look different now. I glued the shamrock back on. I took apart this whole thing, checked it for any breakage, and it's in good shape. I haven't replaced the follower in this. This is all original. And then this is how you carry the gun on duty. You get a smaller barrel, right? A little less weight, but the same full-size grip as a 5906 about the safety decocker. And a lot of police departments had issues training with a safety decocker. Cops will leave, we're talking revolver to semi-auto transition era in the 90s. Some cops will even have a round in the chamber. They leave the safety on. This is an emergency gun to get to something else, which at that point in time was actually a carbine-like rifle. It was a really weird, I can't think of the name of it, but it accepted these types of magazines, which I thought was unique. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it was a carbine-like rifle. It wasn't an AR or anything, because a lot of Massachusetts pilots weren't into the whole shotgun in the front seat thing like you saw on the West Coast. At the most, you had this and maybe that carbine in the trunk. And you carry these two, so you had a total of, let's see, that's 15, we'll say it's 15, 24. You had a good amount of rounds, good loadout on your belt. What did I do to this gun? Well, first thing I did is replace the recoil spring with a 3913 recoil spring, new from Midway a few years ago. And that was a bad idea. For whatever reason, these 12-round mags would jam. So I rebuilt the mags. I put a new new mag springs in them, because they sat for years loaded in his duty belt pouches. And I replaced the grip on this with a newer grip. There was some type of recall with the grip of these guns in the 80s. Also, the original grip was pretty beat up because my grandfather was left-handed, so getting in and out of the car, this was all scratched and banged up and everything. And so I replaced that. But when I started using the 12-round magazines, they would just jam. And I couldn't figure it out. So I sent the gun back to Smith & Wesson. So I quickly realized it was a magazine problem. I wrote jams on them. But I didn't understand why they were jamming with new magazine followers and everything. The gun would it would eject them fine like this. I ruled out the firing pin as an issue, because you can actually, I don't have it in here. You can actually test the firing pins on these. HR Funk was talking about it. Not the firing pin, the extractor on these. And I think if it's loaded, This will protrude out when it's loaded, I think. It's not really a tactile thing. Not many people talk about it. I always do a press check to see if it's loaded. So anyhow, I was going through the toolbox one day. I was moving. I moved to here. And I found the original recoil spring. You know, the plastic bag labels. Like, I keep everything, especially these older guns. So I dropped it in. Whatever. Went to the backyard, loaded up on these with 12 rounds. I dumped some rounds into the steel plate back in the backyard. Worked fine. No problem. So I had to be recoil spring put in. So what I would encourage, keep the original recoil spring if you have one of these guns in your gun. Or test function it with a new recoil spring if that's your choice. But don't go obsessively replacing the recoil springs, especially if a police officer's gun. Carried lot, fired little. Anyhow, those are my first memories of a semi-auto. I'll tell a quick story about this. So, year was 91, and Chips was on TNT. I was watching that, because I still watching that show today, actually. I'm on season 6, which is absolutely awful. Don't just watch it to finish it. He comes over, he shows my mom, who's not a gun lady, by the way. Hey, look what I got! And he has this magazine in it. I got a new gun for the police department. Takes the mag out, this one here, clears it in the sink, and hands it to my mom. My mom didn't like that. This gun went everywhere with him. He carried in a level 1 Safariland, if I remember correctly. We weren't really into the whole level 3 stuff yet. And his job was pretty low risk. Mostly directed traffic, responding to fire calls, direct traffic, winter weather type stuff, you know, dealing with directed traffic there, going to high school football games, working details at the mall and all that. Just standing around off duty. Low risk stuff for the most part. Let's just say we wasn't kicking down doors and pulling people over. But it's a good way to serve your community. It's sad that all the auxiliary and reserve departments are gone in Massachusetts, because when you need to force direct traffic, do a special event, you know, answer like non-criminal type calls, just nuisance calls during a storm, or you need to close a road, or just have somebody stand around in a police presence. I mean, that's what they're there for. So this gun's a little scraped up, as you can see. I kind of did that myself. The finish is not bad for somebody who, you know, didn't do it. It has non-MIM parts, which I don't really think it makes a difference, really. Especially if Smith & Wesson Construction. Now, this gun, does it remind you of something, kind of? A shorter barrel, right? 3.5 inches. But with the capacity of a full-size gun and the grip of a full-size gun, right? With the ability to go discreet and carry off duty with this. What's it remind you of? This reminds me kind of a SIG P365 platform, sort of. You know, you got the XL, slightly bigger gun. You got this, smaller grips. You got, not as much interchangeability, of course. You can't really do different things with this. You can't, I mean, you could change the grips. There's not many options, but it's not like the SIG where it's modular. But it's kind of ahead of its time. And these are nicknamed the miniguns, and this would be a good off-duty, on-duty carry for its time. An amazing choice. I'm so proud that this gun I inherited, and I'm very proud to own it. It only comes out on Sundays, usually. But this is my earliest memories of a semi-automatic handgun, and it you know, it makes me sad that my grandfather passed away, but I'm so lucky that I got it, that I inherited it and it stayed in the family. I hope that you have some guns in your family that you own that was owned by somebody special. I sound Mr. Rogers-like, but it's a guy thing if you're over 40. Hell, even if you're 20, you know, you got grandpa's shotgun or something. So the DA trigger is okay for what it is. It has mag disconnect too. It's not bad. It's not bad. I mean, who carries these still? Well, the bigger cousin, the 5946. The 5946 is very popular in New York City if you order gray-haired cops, which basically would be police officers my age if I was a police officer. A lot of what do they call them? ESU cops, the emergency SWAT team cops carry these. We're not going to go into details about New York City guns, but this is the only off-the-shelf New York City gun a police officer can use because of their stupid trigger rules they have. I mean, it's controllable. Your shots are not bad with it. But you don't have that DASA transition. However, I feel confident with this gun. I don't carry it, though, as a weapon if we're going in the city or something. Not that I'm going to do anything. I don't want to hurt anybody, but I just don't want this gun ever taken from me. I also bring this gun to gun shows, and I open carry there where it's allowed. And a lot of gray-haired older people come up and talk to me about this. Winston-Salem Police, one other department, had these back in the day, and the similar thing saved one of the officers' lives. He got into a firefight with somebody. It might have been a man with a rifle or something, I'm not sure. It was nighttime, and he had one of these, and full-size 15 rounds, and he stopped the threat. U.S. Customs use these, too. This model here, as a one-fits-all gun they could issue to their plainclothes officers, the uniformed officers, off-duty, on-duty. And I remember being in Logan Airport, seeing a police officer, U.S. Customs officer, walk around with one of these on his belt. The 5946 also is very popular, or was, with the Canadian law enforcement community and the Alaska State Troopers. A robust, solid platform. But it's double action only. So you'd have to learn and appreciate this platform. Now, we may say, younger people may say, well, I'm going to get Glocks and this and that. I'm not a big fan of striker fire guns. I know I own the P365. But at the time, Glocks weren't really making the inroads they were today. That was like the mid-90s. If my grandfather had to choose a semi-auto in the mid-90s, I bet you he probably would have been a Glock on his belt. He had a Sigma series he wanted to use, a .40 caliber when it came out as his primary handgun. And he did not like that gun. He didn't like how I had to pull the trigger to clean it. He didn't like that at all. So that Sigma sat, I don't know where it went. I think he sold it at some gun store and bought some World War II era type stuff that he was into because he was in the National Guard in the 50s and 60s, and all the stuff they gave him was World War II surplus. So this would be a good choice. But at the time, the Glock wasn't considered a serious contender. And Smith & Wesson really dropped the ball in marketing in the 90s with their guns. I don't know what happened. I think a lot of it was because Smith & Wesson was being bullied by the Clinton administration, all this stuff, assault weapon stuff, got all that garbage that Biden's tried to bring back. I think also there's just like, where's Smith & Wesson? That's it. They didn't look the other way how Colt was doing in Hartford. They as far as I know, besides the 1911s, Colt never really made a semi-auto gun in this era. So it's one of my favorite guns, I'm not going to lie. And in Massachusetts, it was the only gun that I had that had more than 10 rounds. And for a while, it did home defense duty. But I upgraded the SIG P226 as home defense duty mostly now. But I figured I'd just talk about this for about 20 minutes or so. But I miss my grandfather, and, well, I don't think he'd be happy with the way things are going right now, especially in Massachusetts. But, if you have that older gun or older knife or something that your grandfather uses, and they start to get sick or have dementia or something, try to secure all that stuff when they're healthy, because when that happens, it's very difficult, if at all possible, to find things. I mean, there's stuff that he had that I just can't find. I never was able to find it. Not guns or anything, but, pictures of him in uniform, other things, and it's just sad. But he lived a good life. He lived till he was 83.